Everyone in the classroom thought it was just another normal lesson, until the prince casually rewrote mathematics itself. In just a few seconds, he created something that didn't exist before. And what shocked everyone the most was how effortless it looked. When he shows it to the teacher, it is immediately dismissed as impossible, but the moment the instructor takes a closer look, he freezes because it actually works. Not only does it work, it is something entirely new, a discovery no one has ever seen before. Shocked, the teacher rushes out to report it, while Cecil remains completely unfazed. As for him, understanding everything instantly is normal, and that is exactly why the entire class feels boring. At the royal palace, a beautiful girl suddenly approaches Cecil and declares, without hesitation, that she is a villainess destined to steal him away from the heroine and leave him heartbroken in the end, leaving Cecil completely confused as her words make no sense to him at all. Later, at the royal capital, Cecil formally introduces himself as the Crown Prince of Alfasta as he meets his fiancée Bersha for the first time. But as she continues speaking with complete confidence, it becomes obvious that not only Cecil, but even everyone around her has no idea what she is talking about. Despite the strange situation, Cecil remains calm and composed, suggesting they move to a more proper setting and talk over tea. And although Bersha reacts oddly at first, she eventually agrees, marking the beginning of a very unusual and unpredictable conversation. Sitting together over tea, Cecil calmly introduces his personal butler, Zeno, while Bersha quietly stares at him with suspicion, prompting Cecil to question if something is wrong, only for her to suddenly point out that he seems far too composed for someone his age and even wonders if he might be a reincarnation. Cecil is briefly confused by the idea but naturally explains that this is simply how royalty is taught to behave, though behind him, Zeno internally disagrees, thinking that no ordinary child could act this detached and philosophical, while Cecil subtly notices that his butler's true thoughts are almost spilling out despite his silence. Turning back to Bersha, Cecil calmly asks her to explain what she meant earlier, and while casually eating sweets, she confidently begins revealing everything, insisting that he must understand the truth so he can one day reject her properly. She then shocks him by claiming she remembers her past life in a place called Japan, where stories were experienced through moving images like novels, known as otome games, and according to her, this very world is one of those stories. Because of that, she already knows the entire future, explaining that Cecil is destined to fall in love with another noble girl known as the Maiden of Destiny, while she herself will become a jealous villainess who torments the heroine, leading to their engagement being broken and her family falling into ruin. Despite describing her own downfall, she shows no hesitation, proudly declaring that by being defeated, she will allow them to find happiness, and even if her fate is destruction, she intends to embrace it beautifully as a perfect flower of evil. Hearing all of this, Cecil realizes that for the first time in his life, he cannot fully understand what someone is saying, yet instead of rejecting it, he calmly concludes that whether Bersha is imagining things or truly predicting the future does not matter, as she is simply trying to become the person she believes she is meant to be, and as long as it does not interfere with her role as a future queen, he has no reason to stop her. Curious, he asks what she meant by becoming a first-rate flower of evil, and with complete confidence, Bersha describes it as someone strong, noble, and beautiful, a woman who walks toward her own destruction without hesitation. Cecil quietly repeats those words, slightly intrigued, but Bersha quickly becomes flustered, insisting he misunderstood, as she was never meant to be someone remarkable, and in the original story, she was simply a character who never truly stood a chance, even down to her own appearance. Hearing her explanation, Cecil quietly remarks that it sounds like a rather sad fate and wonders if she is truly fine with it, but Bersha immediately denies it, explaining that everything she described was only the version of herself from that story, while she herself is different, someone who once lived a timid life and hid within her own shell, yet still admired him and now genuinely wishes for his happiness above all else. Determined, she declares that she will change herself and become an honest and righteous flower of evil, leaving Cecil completely confused by the contradiction, and before he can even respond, she suddenly announces that she will improve herself and return, only to run off at full speed, leaving him behind in silence. Watching her disappear, Cecil is left wondering what he just experienced, while Zeno asks what he plans to do next, and after a brief moment of thought, Cecil calmly admits that although she lacks the manners expected of someone who would stand beside royalty and much of what she says remains impossible to understand, that unpredictability is exactly what makes her so interesting. Deciding that for now he will simply observe her and, if necessary, guide her onto the proper path. Zeno notices the subtle change in his attitude, pointing out that he seems to be enjoying himself, and Cecil quietly agrees, explaining that for someone like him, who can achieve anything on the first attempt, the world has always felt dull and colorless, leaving him without any real sense of accomplishment. But now, for the first time, something feels different, and as he recalls Bersha's chaotic nature, he finds himself hoping that she will not betray his expectations. 1 year later, while studying alone, Cecil receives a report from a messenger as Zeno informs him that Bersha has shut herself away inside her home for an entire year, something that would normally be concerning. But Cecil calmly explains that he has been keeping track of her condition and that she is actually in very good spirits, leaving Zeno confused as to why she would isolate herself like that, to which Cecil simply responds that everything will make sense once they see her in person, hinting that her reappearance will be sooner than expected. A few days later, Cecil visits Bersha along with Zeno, where she excitedly greets him after a long time and even jokes that he might not recognize her, only to immediately introduce herself as his fiancée, while Cecil quietly observes that her appearance has changed significantly, confirming what he had heard in the reports. As she continues speaking with her usual energy, she nervously asks if he really failed to recognize her. But before the moment can settle, her father suddenly scolds her harshly for her improper attitude toward the crown prince. However, Cecil calmly brushes it aside, describing her behavior as childlike and even adorable, which completely catches Bersha off guard, leaving her blushing as she shyly asks him to repeat what he just said. Her father quickly interrupts, warning her not to be fooled by Cecil's appearance, pointing out that his eyes never seem to smile and that he lacks the warmth to truly dote on something cute, bluntly calling him cold before awkwardly trying to compensate by calling her adorable himself, leaving Cecil quietly wondering if the man realizes he sounded even ruder than Bersha. Later, while they're having tea, the scarf around Bersha suddenly moves, and she panics, calling out to it, instantly exposing that it's actually alive. Cecil, completely unfazed, admits he already suspected it, while Bersha hurriedly apologizes and explains that ever since she took it in, it refuses to leave her side, so she tried to disguise it as a scarf, which clearly didn't work. Instead of questioning it, Cecil decides to ignore it on purpose, finding the situation more entertaining than concerning, and casually shifts the moment by inviting her to enjoy the sweets before the tea gets cold, which she happily agrees to, as if nothing unusual just happened. Just as she's about to eat, her maid coughs, reminding her she's on a diet. But the moment Cecil mentions it's low sugar, she gives in instantly, completely losing herself in the taste, making him quietly realize she's moving further away from the noble villainess she keeps talking about. So he simply shifts the conversation to tomorrow. Bersha immediately agrees, confidently declaring that at tomorrow's party she'll act as a perfect villainess and properly stand by his side. But instead of feeling reassured, Cecil can't help but feel slightly uneasy, as if her confidence doesn't quite match reality. Though he still calmly tells her that everything about her being a villainess and remembering a past life should remain strictly between the two of them. Bersha questions why, and Cecil calmly explains that high society is unpredictable, where even a single mistake can be used against you, so a true villainess should never expose herself so easily, which she immediately takes the wrong way, confidently concluding that a first-rate villain works in secret while a third-rate one talks too much, proudly declaring that unlike her past self, she will become a truly noble and beautiful flower of evil. Cecil says he's glad she understands, though he quietly feels she misunderstood, then mentions that tomorrow is his 11th birthday and that he's happy she'll be there. But hearing this suddenly shocks Bersha as she realizes her own age, and in that moment, her expression completely changes as she begins to panic, revealing that according to the future she knows, her mother is going to die from an epidemic that will spread in the coming summer, just before her next birthday. Cecil questions it, and Bersha explains that a deadly disease will spread, one that takes time to cure, and the only treatment requires a rare herb called Luana leaf, which will run out, leading to countless deaths, including her mother despite all efforts to save her. Realizing this happens a year later, Cecil calmly points out that preparing in advance should be enough to change the outcome, but Bersha hesitates, worried about altering the future, forcing him to ask what matters more, the scenario or her mother. And when she chooses her mother without hesitation, he steps forward, gently comforting her and reminding her that as her fiancée, she doesn't have to face this alone, and that they can find a solution together. 1 year later, Bersha suddenly bursts out, calling Cecil awful, only to immediately realize her mistake and try to correct herself, while Cecil calmly apologizes instead, noticing her frustration. And she finally vents that it's already her 10th birthday and despite trying to prepare for the epidemic, all he ever wrote back was that everything would be fine, leaving her completely lost on what she was supposed to do. Cecil quietly signals Zeno, clearing the room before gently apologizing, admitting he didn't realize how distressed she was, but calmly reassures her that everything truly is fine, which only confuses Bersha more as she explains how she desperately tried to gather the Luna leaf yet failed, and even stranger, the disease never spread and her mother remained perfectly healthy, leaving her unable to understand what's happening, until Cecil finally reveals that the epidemic did occur. Exactly as she said, it was simply contained before it could spread. Bersha is stunned to hear that the disease actually spread, only for Cecil to calmly reveal that he used her information to identify it in advance and created the medicine beforehand, ensuring patients were treated the moment it appeared, leaving her completely shocked and demanding an explanation, while Cecil, oddly unfazed by her reaction, simply asks her to calm down and suggests they take a walk outside before explaining everything properly. Walking together, Cecil calmly takes her back to a year ago, explaining that right after their conversation, he immediately began preparing, starting with researching the Luana leaf in the palace library, then using that knowledge to successfully cultivate it himself, surprising everyone as it grew into something extraordinary. And once he secured the herb, he used the details Bersha provided along with knowledge from medical experts to identify the disease in advance. After figuring everything out, Cecil quietly creates the antidote in advance, though he admits there's no way to test it without actual patients, so instead of acting directly, he decides to guide a skilled doctor toward the solution, pretending it's just curiosity while discussing diseases, new strains, and eventually steering the conversation toward the Luana leaf. However, things don't go as smoothly as expected, and despite his efforts, the doctor fails to notice the obvious connection, leaving Cecil unusually frustrated as he's forced to wait, while Zeno finds the situation oddly amusing. Still trusting the doctor's ability, Cecil continues patiently until months later, the doctor finally reaches the conclusion on his own, exactly as Cecil intended, even if it took far longer than expected. Back in the present, Cecil calmly explains that once the first patient appeared, the doctor handled everything using the treatment he had been guided toward, successfully containing the disease, though inwardly he admits he was still surprised it actually happened, as he hadn't fully believed Bersha's story, and reflects that the difficulty in guiding the doctor and the anxiety he caused her were likely due to his own habit of understanding things too quickly while skipping proper explanations. Bersha, still overwhelmed, asks why he would go that far, and Cecil simply answers that he couldn't ignore his fiancée when she was clearly anxious, but she struggles to believe it, pointing out that an 11-year-old shouldn't be capable of all this, while Cecil calmly explains that as Crown Prince he has access to the palace library and the ability to call upon experts, making it sound completely normal, even as Zeno silently disagrees, knowing that what Cecil did was far beyond what any normal child could achieve, something Cecil subtly seems to notice without saying it out loud. Bersha, still confused, wonders if things can really work out this conveniently and jokingly calls him the Android Prince. But Cecil brushes it off, telling her not to worry about the details since her mother is safe and the damage was minimized, which is all that matters, and she quickly accepts that, deciding it's for the best, while Cecil lightly notes that she's already given up trying to understand before shifting the moment by mentioning he has a personal gift for her. Excited, Bersha reacts immediately, and Cecil presents a blue necklace he made himself, which she admires, only for him to casually reveal that it's actually a universal antidote, leaving her completely shocked as he explains that he created it using knowledge he discovered while researching in the palace library. He explains that while searching the palace library, he stumbled upon a hidden room and used the knowledge he found there to create it, intending it as a protective charm since her life could be at risk in the future. Then gently places the necklace on her, telling her it suits her perfectly, leaving Bersha blushing as she thanks him and suddenly swears to repay him by fully embracing her role and becoming a proper villainess. Completely fired up, she even starts planning to turn her own father into a villain, which Cecil immediately shuts down, knowing it would cause serious problems, but she continues anyway, determined to ensure his happy ending with the heroine, while Cecil quietly realizes she isn't really listening to him at all, though instead of stopping her, he simply accepts it, finding her chaotic determination far more entertaining than anything else. 1 year later, Cecil meets Bersha's father at the royal palace and immediately notices how exhausted he looks, only to find out the reason is Bersha herself, who has spent the entire year trying to turn her own father into a proper villain, even going as far as preparing detailed notes on crimes that are surprisingly realistic, leaving Cecil quietly impressed while the Marquis looks completely drained from hearing about evil plans day and night. Trying to calm him down, Cecil casually suggests it might just be a phase, but that only backfires when the Marquis points out she should be targeting Cecil instead, which somehow turns into him realizing she might just love her father too much, while also hinting that Cecil himself might already seem evil enough, something even Zeno silently agrees with. As the topic shifts to their upcoming debut in high society, the Marquis feels both emotional and worried, while Cecil calmly reassures him that he'll support Bersha, though deep down, he admits that if things get interesting, he might just sit back and watch it unfold. Finally, the day of their social debut arrives, and while Bersha is fully prepared for her big, villainous moment, Cecil casually walks in and calls her beautiful, instantly throwing her off balance before she forces herself back into character, determined not to lose focus. But the moment they step into the hall, everything flips, because instead of creating chaos, Bersha handles the situation perfectly, greeting everyone with elegance and confidence, leaving the nobles impressed and Cecil quietly amused, realizing that despite all her talk about becoming evil, she's naturally acting like the ideal noble instead. While everything seems to be going smoothly, a viscount suddenly calls out to Bersha and immediately gets a little too comfortable, grabbing her hand and openly flirting, which doesn't sit well with Cecil at all, as he quietly notices how casually the man is touching his fiancée and starts questioning what kind of connection they have. Just as Bersha is about to say something, Cecil steps in without hesitation, pulls her away, and calmly excuses them, claiming she isn't feeling well, leaving her completely confused as she's suddenly dragged out of the situation before she can even react. Inside a quiet room, Bersha questions why she was suddenly pulled away, but Cecil keeps it direct and asks her to answer honestly, whether the information she used for her so-called villain manual came from the Viscount, and instead of denying it, she admits it without hesitation, only becoming embarrassed that he had gone through her notes, while Cecil, already expecting that answer, calmly asks her to explain exactly how she obtained that information. Hesitantly, Bersha explains that when the Viscount visited her father, she remembered he was one of the people who was supposed to lead him down a villainous path, so she deliberately got close to him, doing everything she could to gain his trust, and eventually managed to get him to openly talk about criminal activities, believing she was successfully learning how to become a proper villain. At that point, Cecil's tone shifts completely as he tells her, without softening it, that the Viscount isn't some harmless noble but a man known for preying on young girls, making it clear how serious the situation actually is, and then, without raising his voice, he asks her directly the only thing that matters, whether he ever laid a hand on her. As she thinks back, something clicks, and that friendly image of the Viscount suddenly twists into something far more disturbing in her mind, causing her to break down as she realizes how dangerous the situation actually was. While Cecil quietly understands that from the outside, the man would have seemed like nothing more than a kind, harmless adult, and that she could never have seen through it on her own. Cecil pulls her in and quietly reassures her he'll handle it, but the moment his expression hardens, it's clear he's already decided someone's going to pay for this. Then he calmly asks if she's been in contact with anyone else, and Bersha, still treating this like part of her plan, casually mentions a few names, which makes him immediately step in and tell her to stop putting herself in danger, his tone calm but firm this time, because he knows she's taking this far too lightly. Bersha quickly agrees, saying she doesn't want to go through something like that again, but then immediately follows it up by deciding she'll just be more careful next time, completely missing the point, while Cecil internally questions why she won't just stop altogether, only to calmly tell her that even getting involved is dangerous. Yet she stays determined, insisting she'll handle it for his sake, making it obvious she isn't listening at all. And at that point, Cecil just accepts it, quietly shifting his focus as he realizes this mess might actually be the perfect chance to clean out the corruption in the kingdom. After that, Cecil calls in the Marquis, who walks in already prepared to apologize for whatever chaos his daughter caused this time. But Cecil calmly redirects the situation and has him sit, then casually drops that he's been hearing some very questionable rumors about certain nobles, and more importantly, that they've been trying to approach him, which instantly wipes that worried father look off his face and replaces it with pure confusion. Cecil then casually mentions that one of those nobles has already gotten close to Bersha and behaved in a way that definitely crossed the line, and just like that, the Marquis goes from confused to ready to start a war in seconds, but Cecil calmly steps in and tones it down, assuring him it didn't go too far while also asking him not to bring it up with her, which leaves the Marquis stuck in that painful situation where he's furious, but also forced to stay quiet about it. Cecil, already several steps ahead, keeps Bersha out of the situation and calmly proposes handling everything quietly, asking the Marquis to assist, which briefly confuses him, but the moment Cecil explains he can use their approach to gather evidence, it suddenly makes perfect sense, and just like that, the Marquis switches from worried father to fully committed execution mode, ready to deal with them personally. Walking through the palace, Cecil notes that everything is finally set in motion, though he also realizes that once he moves into the academy dorms, keeping control over things will become much harder, and sure enough, 6 months later at Hom Academy, he's already bored out of his mind, since everything being taught feels like revision to him, and just as he starts thinking life would be slightly more interesting if Bersha were around, she suddenly appears out of nowhere, sprinting toward him. At full speed, instantly turning his peaceful boredom into a situation he clearly did not sign up for. He turns around, trying to stay composed, and calmly asks what brought her all the way there, but Bersha, completely panicked, immediately drops the most dangerous sentence possible, saying they have a baby on the way, which instantly shuts down Cecil's brain for a moment while she continues spiraling about the future, and within seconds the nearby students start turning it into gossip, praising him like he just achieved something unbelievable, while Cecil is internally trying to process how his life went from peaceful boredom to this level of chaos, firmly denying every assumption in his head, as even Zeno is barely holding back his laughter at the situation. Bersha, still in full panic mode, keeps talking like this is some life-ending scandal, only making things sound worse with every sentence, while Cecil is internally begging her to stop before the rumors get even wilder. So he finally steps in and calmly asks the simplest question possible: who exactly is pregnant with whose child? And after all that chaos, she casually reveals it's her mother expecting a child with her father, something completely normal, instantly turning the entire situation into one perfectly unnecessary misunderstanding. With everyone already watching, Bersha suddenly realizes how badly that sounded and panics, blurting out that it's not her and that nothing has even happened between them, which somehow makes it even more awkward, while Cecil calmly steps in, pulls her away, and handles it like nothing happened, then casually looks back at the crowd and makes it very clear, without saying much, that any rumors would be a very bad idea, and just like that, everyone silently agrees to forget what they just heard. Cecil calmly offers to have a carriage prepared and escort her back so she can explain everything properly, but Bersha, still recovering from that public disaster, awkwardly insists she already came on her own, as if that helps, while Cecil politely refuses to let that happen, making it clear he's not about to send his fiancée away like that, only for her to admit, completely seriously, that if she stays any longer, she might not survive the embarrassment. Cecil then casually raises the stakes by teasing her with the idea of a kiss once they're alone, which instantly overwhelms Bersha as she turns bright red and runs off at full speed, leaving him standing there, clearly entertained by how easily she lost composure, while Zeno silently notes that this was definitely not an accident, and Cecil, completely unbothered, decides he rather likes calling her Bersha, as if that little reaction just made his day a lot more interesting. 6 months later, Cecil visits the Noches estate, where the Marquis greets him as usual, while Bersha is busy holding her little brother, looking unusually quiet for once, and when Cecil steps into her room, he starts noticing a pattern. Everything is blue and yellow, the same color she always wears, which makes him pause for a second and wonder if it's just coincidence, or something a little too specific, before immediately deciding not to think too deeply about it, even though that small detail leaves him with a feeling he's not entirely comfortable admitting. Bersha suddenly apologizes about her little brother, which completely catches Cecil off guard, as he calmly asks her to raise her head and explain what she's even apologizing for, since from his perspective, nothing about this situation makes sense yet. After hearing her out, Cecil calmly sums it up, explaining that in her version of events, the family was supposed to have no heir and adopt a talented boy who would later rise as one of his aides, but thanks to her mother surviving, that entire plan has quietly fallen apart, and while Cecil sees this as everything going perfectly fine, Bersha treats it like they've accidentally deleted an important character from the story. Cecil quietly considers that if this boy is truly talented, it would be a waste to leave him out. But before he can go further, Bersha starts explaining that at least this avoids one route where that boy ends up with the heroine, which immediately makes Cecil pause, since up until now she claimed he was the one destined for her, and when he points that out, she casually drops the fact that there are actually multiple possible outcomes depending on the heroine's choices, something she somehow forgot to mention earlier, leaving Cecil internally questioning how such a critical detail was skipped, before calmly concluding that if that's the case, there's no reason their engagement has to be broken at all. Bersha suddenly shuts that idea down, saying it can't happen, almost revealing something important before stopping herself mid-sentence, which immediately catches Cecil's attention, though she quickly brushes it off and insists on pushing her original plan, making it obvious she's hiding something, while Cecil, choosing not to press it for now, shifts the conversation and asks about these so-called candidates, and Bersha starts listing them out like a prepared roster: Lord Valtnokens, Lord Charles Lionel, Lord Neltcrum, and even the second prince, Sean Turquoine Alfasta. Hearing her list those names so precisely, Cecil realizes there's no way she could know this on her own, which makes him take her so-called past life memories far more seriously, while Bersha continues explaining that according to her, events will naturally pull all these people toward the heroine, but now that things have changed, she's worried that same force might redirect itself in a dangerous way, possibly bringing harm to her younger brother, revealing that behind all her chaotic plans, she's actually been quietly afraid this entire time. Cecil finally understands that all of this comes down to her worrying about her brother, which, in a very Bersha way, somehow turned into another complicated scenario problem. So he simplifies it instantly, pointing out that if the issue is just about that boy needing to attend the academy and become a candidate, then it's not really a problem at all, catching Bersha off guard as she hesitantly agrees, while Cecil, already confident, casually tells her to leave everything to him, like he's just been handed another problem he's already solved. At Courtgain's workplace, he's quietly handling paperwork while his boss loudly proves he has zero people skills, scolding everyone in the worst way possible until the staff just give up and walk off. And after surviving that daily chaos, Courtgain returns home expecting peace, only to find Cecil casually waiting inside like this is a completely normal visit, instantly sending him into panic mode. But Cecil keeps things calm, brushes off the formalities, and smoothly shifts into questioning him about the local lord, using the excuse of hearing complaints from the people. Courtgain is clearly surprised that Cecil came personally, but Cecil smoothly plays it off as royal responsibility, while internally admitting he's technically telling the truth, just not the whole truth, then casually asks for his opinion on the local lord, and instead of complaints, Courtgain gives a surprisingly balanced answer, explaining that the man is actually logical and capable, just terrible at communicating, turning good advice into insults, like scolding farmers for harvesting too early when he was actually trying to help them earn more, and in the end, it becomes clear the real problem isn't the Lord's intentions. It's the way he delivers them. Cecil realizes Courtgain's answer lines up perfectly with what he already knows and, without making a big deal out of it, casually tells him he passes, which completely confuses him, only for Cecil to immediately follow it up with a life-changing offer, asking him to be adopted into a noble house and work as his informant, saying it as calmly as if he's assigning paperwork, even though the job comes with real danger. But for Courtgain, who had already settled for an ordinary life, this sounds less like a risk and more like a miracle, and in the next moment he's already on one knee, pledging his loyalty like his entire story just got rewritten on the spot. Back at the palace, Cecil calmly explains that Courtgain will attend the academy as planned, which immediately reassures Bersha as she happily notes that her father is getting along better than ever with those suspicious nobles, completely unaware he's actually spying on them, while Cecil quietly keeps that detail to himself. And just when everything seems perfectly handled, Bersha casually brings up avoiding a reverse harem, which makes Cecil pause for a second before asking what she even means, only to hear an explanation that turns romance into complete chaos, and he shuts it down instantly, pointing out that in reality, that kind of situation wouldn't be love, it would be a disaster for the entire kingdom. Bersha keeps insisting that even then, love could force someone to accept such a situation, presenting it like a valid outcome, but Cecil shuts it down immediately, making it clear no one would be foolish enough to risk the kingdom over something like that. Still trying to justify it, Bersha brings up the idea of charm-like influence, even though she believes such magic doesn't exist, which is when Cecil calmly explains that while it isn't magic, things like light spirits can create a sense of euphoria, and if misused, they could influence people in a way that feels almost unnatural. Bersha agrees at first, then suddenly freezes as something clicks, realizing what he just implied and asking if spirits actually exist, which makes Cecil calmly confirm it and casually drop that both of them are already contracted to one, completely breaking her understanding before asking where she even found Kuro, and as she explains how she met her in the forest and named her after getting injured, Cecil connects it instantly and reveals that this wasn't some coincidence at all. She unknowingly formed a contract with a high-level darkness spirit, explaining it like it's basic knowledge while Bersha is still trying to catch up. Bersha is completely stunned as the realization hits her, but before she can even process it, Cecil casually adds that Zeno is his contracted spirit as well, which only makes things worse as her brain completely gives up trying to keep up, while Cecil, completely unfazed, has Zeno bring out a stack of books and calmly tells her to study properly, like this is just normal homework, leaving Bersha overwhelmed and barely functioning, while Cecil, already thinking ahead, concludes that if someone were to rely on something like spirit-based influence to affect him, they'd need far more than that to even stand a chance. After completely overwhelming Bersha with the truth about spirits, Cecil moves on like nothing happened, and time quickly passes as the stage shifts to Hom Academy, where he now stands as the student council president, delivering a flawless welcome speech to the new students, but just as everything feels formal and composed, he casually drops one small detail that changes the mood instantly, revealing that his fiancée has finally enrolled as well, making it clear that even before she shows up, the attention is already on her. In the council room, the conversation naturally turns to Bersha, with Charles noting how she drew more attention than anyone during the ceremony. While Cecil responds calmly, and the others begin sharing their impressions, Sean speaks with genuine admiration, calling her beautiful and even mentioning she will be his elder sister-in-law. Expressing his wish to befriend her, Nelt admits that her sharp and decisive presence makes him slightly uneasy, and Vault, in contrast, focuses on her physique, with striking detail, prompting Charles to question him and assume that someone like Bersha should embody the image of a refined noble lady. Listening to all this, Cecil quietly reflects that Vault's observation might not be entirely wrong, while Charles continues to hold on to the image of Bersha as a perfect noble lady, a thought Cecil finds rather amusing, especially considering what's yet to be revealed. The conversation then shifts to Courtgain, as Charles asks about his connection to the Nochase family, but Courtgain responds bluntly, explaining that being from the lowest branch, he never had the chance to meet her, and quickly shuts the conversation down to return to his work, leaving Charles commenting on his cold attitude, while Cecil simply notes that despite his diligence, he can be a bit too rigid at times. Zeno then reminds Cecil it's time, and as he prepares to leave, Charles quickly catches on and asks if he's going to see Bersha, which Cecil openly confirms, even referring to her as his adorable fiancée, something that completely surprises everyone, since this is coming from the same person who usually shows little interest in others. But Cecil simply clarifies that he does take interest, just in people he finds entertaining, which only makes Charles more curious, leading him to suggest they all go together, clearly eager to meet her, while Sean immediately joins in, and with that, what was meant to be a simple visit turns into a group outing as Cecil agrees without much resistance. Walking through the academy hallway, they pass a girl chasing after her familiar, someone who clearly stands out, but Cecil doesn't pause for it and instead quietly calls Courtgain over, giving him a brief instruction before continuing, and soon they arrive where Bersha is having tea with her friends, only for Cecil to casually greet her, completely catching her off guard, while as he observes the group, his attention subtly shifts to Kuro, noticing how she's taken a form suitable for staying by Bersha's side, even if no one else seems to realize what she truly is. Caught completely off guard, Bersha questions why he's here so early and even points out the entire student council arriving with him, nearly slipping into her usual scenario thinking. But Cecil calmly corrects her and reminds her this is exactly the time they agreed on, leaving her trying to recover, until Joanna steps in smoothly, greeting him with confidence and asking to speak, while Cecil acknowledges her just as naturally, recognizing her as Joanna Kurtzwarren, a duke's daughter and his second cousin, clearly someone who isn't intimidated by the situation at all. Joanna steps in at just the wrong moment and casually tells Cecil how Bersha had been waiting for him, getting restless and even a little down when he didn't show up sooner, completely exposing her, and Bersha immediately tries to deny it, only to end up admitting it halfway, making it even more awkward. So she quickly tries to recover by proudly saying she's made plenty of friends, but then calls them minions to keep up her villain act, which completely ruins the moment as Cecil calmly points out that they're clearly just her friends, leaving her flustered while trying to fix what she just said. Joanna then calmly clears things up, saying there's no need to worry because they're all part of a group dedicated to admiring Bersha, essentially treating it like a fan club, explaining that their goal is simply to watch over her as she grows, since she's surprisingly popular with everyone, which completely catches Bersha off guard as she had no idea, while Cecil quietly realizes she's the only one unaware of just how much attention she draws, and explains that simply being around Bersha feels comforting. Cynthia adds that in a society filled with hidden intentions, her honesty stands out and brings a sense of ease, and Silica goes a step further, saying she wants to watch over her so she continues growing just as genuine as she is now, which makes their admiration sound far more sincere than playful, leaving Bersha flustered as she tries to brush it off, even pointing out that Silica sounds more like a mother than a friend. Zeno quietly signals the moment and Cecil takes it without hesitation, calling Bersha aside before presenting her with a pot of blue roses to mark her enrollment. But instead of reacting normally, Bersha immediately starts connecting it to her imagined scenario, treating it like a special event reward, questioning the unusual color, recognizing how rare blue roses are, and even wondering why it's a potted plant, turning a simple gift into something far more significant in her mind. Cecil simply explains that he chose that color because she likes it and even made the roses himself, making it clear this is the only one of its kind, which immediately raises the value of the gift far beyond what Bersha expected, leaving her hesitant to accept something so rare. But when he insists, she tries to respond sincerely and ends up comparing the color to his eyes without thinking, only to panic and correct herself instantly. While behind them, Charles and Nelt quietly observe and begin to realize that Bersha is not quite what they initially assumed. While walking together that evening, Bersha admits she had been uneasy since her scenario keeps changing, but feels reassured believing the meet cute event went as expected, which prompts Cecil to ask what that even means, and as she explains the encounter he was supposed to have, Cecil calmly describes it from his perspective, saying the girl's behavior felt suspicious and inappropriate, and that he had already asked Courtgain to report her, completely overturning Bersha's expectations as she realizes the so-called heroine has been treated as a problem rather than someone special. After a brief pause, Bersha explains how it was supposed to happen, saying he should have taken a red rose meant for her and given it to that girl, calling it the meet cute event, but Cecil calmly points out that nothing about that could happen since he gave her a potted plant instead, making the entire setup impossible from the start, and when she asks if he felt anything at all, he dismisses it without hesitation, saying someone far more unusual left a stronger impression on him, which makes Bersha realize the event has completely fallen apart, leaving her momentarily defeated. But after a second, she softens and admits that even so, she's still a little happy, and Cecil quietly accepts that without saying much. Later in the student council room, Joanna arrives right on time, completely at ease, and makes it clear that refusing an invitation from Cecil isn't exactly an option at this academy, before taking her seat like she already knows this won't be a casual chat. And when Cecil brings up seeing her at Bersha's tea party, she doesn't hesitate, admitting she was drawn to Bersha from the start, even pointing out how her oddly impressive guide to the royal capital ended up pulling more people into their group, which only reminds Cecil of that strange but effective talent of hers. And just as the conversation starts to feel relaxed, he smoothly shifts the tone, making it clear he didn't call her here just to talk. Joanna quickly realizes what he's getting at and brings up the society herself, and Cecil calmly acknowledges it, pointing out how large it's become before asking if there's anyone within it who could be a risk. But instead of answering directly, Joanna pushes back, hinting that he's already looked into it and calling it rather improper, which only makes Cecil conclude that she's far more sharp and calculating than Bersha. And without missing a beat, he flips the situation by bringing up her connection to Sean, catching her completely off guard and exposing the one thing she clearly didn't want used against her. That completely throws Joanna off, and she drops the polite act, openly calling him a black-hearted schemer, while Cecil casually fires back without missing a beat, turning it into a back and forth where she vents her frustration, even dragging Sean and Bersha into it, which only gives Cecil the perfect opening to tease her about being jealous, something she immediately denies but fails to convincingly hide, until Zeno steps in to remind him not to push too far. And just like that, Cecil smoothly ends the teasing and brings the conversation back on track, asking her to finally share what she knows about the potential threats. Joanna finally gives in and explains the group itself isn't the problem since she keeps everyone in line. But the real trouble comes from outside, nobles who've started getting irritated by how popular Bersha has become. And as Cecil looks through the list, one name immediately stands out, the same girl from the hallway, so this isn't just talk anymore. She then sums it up simply: some girls admire Cecil a little too much, and others are upset because their own fiancés are paying attention to Bersha, turning it into pure jealousy with a direction. And while this should sound like a problem, Cecil treats it like things at the academy just became a lot more entertaining. Joanna immediately pushes back, unable to understand how he could see any of this as fun, pointing out that Bersha is the one at risk here. But Cecil remains calm and dismisses the concern, saying she's not alone and has people around her, especially Joanna, whose way of thinking he trusts enough to leave things in her hands, which completely throws her off as she wasn't expecting that kind of confidence. But after a brief moment, she composes herself and accepts it, deciding to take responsibility and protect Bersha properly, before excusing herself and leaving, while Cecil simply watches with quiet amusement. Left alone, Cecil quietly pieces everything together, realizing the real threat lies with heroine and the influence of light-based abilities. And while he's already prepared Bersha by having her study Kuro's powers for protection, he also knows there's a limitation since those abilities can't be used openly, which leaves him considering his next move for a moment, before simply deciding to act, getting up and heading out to meet Bersha, intrigued since she rarely invites him without a reason. And as Zeno casually points out the obvious, that this probably means trouble, Cecil doesn't deny it at all, clearly more interested than concerned about whatever chaos might be waiting. As Cecil heads to the Rose Garden, he immediately notices heroine resting under a tree right at the meeting spot, and instead of Bersha, it's the so-called heroine lying there like the scene has been perfectly arranged, which makes him realize what Bersha was trying to set up, and sure enough, she's hiding nearby with Kuro, though Cecil spots her instantly and simply plays along, completely ignoring the obvious attempt. And while the heroine tries to get his attention with repeated coughing, he casually sits down, opens a book, and acts like none of it concerns him at all. Everything falls apart in the most ridiculous way when Bersha suddenly screams about a caterpillar on her head, instantly revealing where she was hiding, and Cecil just steps in like this was part of the plan all along, calmly removes it, and handles it like a minor inconvenience, even treating her sudden appearance as if it were perfectly timed, before lightly calling out her little scheme, which leaves her completely flustered trying to recover, while in the background the heroine is still desperately trying to get noticed, and Cecil simply ignores all of it and moves things forward, as if none of this chaos was worth his attention in the first place. Bersha tries to say something but her brain just gives up mid-sentence, while behind them the heroine is practically performing for attention at this point, yet Cecil acts like she's invisible and smoothly changes the entire situation, reminding Bersha she was the one who invited him and immediately tempting her with imported sweets, which works way too easily as her focus shifts in seconds, and before the main character of the scene can even get a single reaction, Cecil casually takes Bersha's hand and walks off with her like this was always the plan, leaving the heroine stuck there talking to herself while he mentally decides that whatever noise is coming from behind is simply not worth his time. While having tea, Bersha keeps sneaking looks at the clock like she's waiting for destiny to hit its mark, and the moment it does, she suddenly panics out of nowhere about forgetting something, rushing through the excuse so perfectly timed it feels less like memory and more like a scheduled event, making the whole performance painfully obvious even to Zeno. Yet Cecil doesn't question a single thing and just goes along with it, calmly asking which classroom he's supposed to head to while letting her dramatic setup play out. When Cecil goes to the classroom to retrieve the item, he finds the heroine already there, greeting him as if this meeting was perfectly timed, and before anything can settle, another student rushes in. Remember, she was supposed to lock the room, and hurriedly does so without checking, trapping them both inside, which the heroine treats like a convenient turn of events while Cecil immediately understands the situation. And as she continues, she confidently thanks him for a rose he never gave, speaking as if something meaningful already happened between them, while Cecil quietly notes how she's trying to force something that never existed into reality. Cecil's attention shifts to the bird, quickly recognizing it as a light spirit, while the heroine continues building the moment, introducing it and trying to make it seem like even the spirit has taken a liking to him. But before she can finish pushing the scene any further, Cecil simply cuts it off entirely and jumps out of the window, leaving everything she was trying to create unfinished. Shocked, the heroine is left calling out as Cecil simply walks off, calmly checking his gloves like that's his only concern, and then casually informs a nearby teacher that a student has been locked inside, treating the whole situation like a minor inconvenience. 1 year later, while having tea, Cecil reflects that it's been a full year since Bersha started her little schemes, and when she asks what happened with the heroine, he casually explains that nothing really happened at all, since they were never even properly introduced, meaning by the Academy's strict social rules, they're still complete strangers, where those of lower status cannot approach higher status without introduction, even if they've already met, though he notes she doesn't seem too interested in following those rules anyway. Bersha is thrown off, questioning why nothing worked even after guiding him through so many events, which makes Cecil realize that everything she's been doing was intentional, and with a quiet sigh, he explains he's deliberately keeping his distance from the heroine and asks her to simply watch over him, which Bersha immediately takes as part of some deeper plan, convinced he's acting for her sake, while Cecil calmly assures her he won't let his precious princess slip away, even as his thoughts show he means it in his own way. Bersha admits she may have misunderstood everything, and Cecil simply accepts it without making a big deal out of it. But as the moment settles, he finds himself reflecting on something he can't quite explain. Watching her try so hard to bring him together with Hironia is strangely amusing, yet at the same time, it leaves him with an unfamiliar discomfort, a quiet tightness in his chest that goes beyond simple annoyance, something he doesn't understand yet but can't ignore either.